When it comes to the draft, teams need to do a little better.
The New York Jets select Zach Wilson,
Bryce Petty,
Christian Hackenberg, Penn State.
Let's take a look back at the last few years and check out every NFL team's favorite mistake to make in the draft. Arizona Cardinals reaching for an egomaniac QB that their team will hate. The Arizona Cardinals love themselves a good reach, which ironically is what their current quarterback, who they reached for at first overall in the 2019 draft, needs to do when he wants cookies off the top shelf for a late-night Call of Duty snack. What makes matters worse for Arizona is when they do reach, it's for a guy that thinks way too highly of himself.
There were 9 mistakes made ahead of me, and I will make sure over the next decade or so that they will know that they made a mistake.
Between taking Murray first and packaging picks to move up and take Josh Rosen 10th.
I'm absolutely the best quarterback in the draft by far. I want to win Super Bowls and I want to have the most. So I'm coming for Tom Brady's record.
The Cardinals have left themselves in quarterback no man's land over the past 10 years or so. Atlanta Falcons, taking skill position players that don't fit their offense. Just ask any Kyle Pitts or Drake London fantasy owners about this one. The Falcons' draft strategy makes zero sense. All they do is reach for guys who have exciting potential, like the aforementioned Pitts and London, but who also don't fit into the run-heavy offense that the current regime wants to utilize. Baltimore Ravens, picking underachieving pass catchers. Listen to these names and stop me when you hear one that you like. Charlie Kolar, Isaiah Likely, Rashad Bateman, Tylan Wallace, even Devin Duvernay. All of them have been very underwhelming pass catchers in the grand scheme of things. We'd have to go all the way back to 2018 when they took Mark Andrews to find a good one. And they lose credit on that pick because they took him in the 3rd round after wasting their 1st rounder on Hayden Hurst. Buffalo Bills, ignoring their roster needs. The Bills are one of those teams that really seem to focus on deep value rather than what would actually help fill their roster. I am all for prioritizing key positions like the defensive line, cornerback, and so on, but not when those are not actually the areas of need for the organization. Carolina Panthers gambling away their picks on retread quarterbacks. The Panthers seem to be deploying the can't make bad picks if you trade them philosophy, but unfortunately, they continue to trade their picks away for retread 1st-round QBs who Carolina greatly overvalues. You know, guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. Let me tell ya, I'm sure that they would like to have all that draft capital back. Chicago Bears, trading away all their picks for a roster that isn't win now. What's worse than going all in by trading a slew of picks to move up and take a quarterback you could have gotten later in the draft? How about proceeding to package multiple firsts to make another trade, essentially doubling down and declaring that with Khalil Mack in tow, your team is ready to go deep into the postseason with the previously alluded to Mitch Trubisky. The Cincinnati Bengals, not investing high picks in offensive linemen. The good news is Cincinnati tries to address its positional needs. The Bengals have drafted 5 O-linemen in the last 3 drafts. The only problem? None of them have been in the 1st round, and just 1 was in the 2nd. Tough to build a legit O-line off the scrap heap. Cleveland Browns, terrible in the 3rd round every year. Man, are the Browns horrendous at drafting guys in the 3rd round for some reason. I would list them off, but these names are so irrelevant, it would really just be a waste of time. Because I doubt y'all remember any of them. Dallas Cowboys, looking for a flashy pick. It's a few years back now, but Ezekiel Elliott is a good example of Dallas prioritizing the glamour of a pick over the value. It's hard to argue against his production, but there is such strong analytics against taking a running back that high in the draft, and it's hard to think that Jones & Co. weren't swayed by his epic showing during Ohio State's national championship run ahead of the draft. Denver Broncos striking out on pass catchers. Maybe it's a good thing that Denver gave up all its picks for Russell Wilson. At least now they won't waste all their high picks striking out on pass catchers. KJ Hamler, Greg Dulcich, Noah Fant, even Jerry Jeudy, who they took 15th overall, has largely been a disappointment. Detroit Lions ignoring positional value. The suits in the Motor City always fall to the temptation of their guy and overlook positional value. For example, when they took TJ Hawkinson, a tight end 8th overall, or the 2020 draft when they took an admittedly good running back, DeAndre Swift, 35th. Green Bay Packers not picking players to win now. Usually, when a team has even a good quarterback, they will become increasingly aggressive in the draft, trying to build around them. The Packers, however, were evidently spoiled and continued to make bizarre picks, like the Jordan Love selection. Houston Texans letting the wrong people make all the decisions. While it might seem like it makes sense to consolidate the personnel decisions, giving your head coach final say often goes awry quickly. Head coaches are only human too, and more often than not, they'll start letting personalities play too much of a role. Indianapolis Colts trading first-rounders despite a mediocre roster. Indianapolis has only had a first-round pick twice in the last 5 years, making them the Rams of the Midwest. Only, without any real postseason success to show for it. Instead, they've gambled away their picks to bring in veteran quarterbacks to fill in the gaping hole that Andrew Luck left in their hearts. Jacksonville Jaguars drafting a quarterback bust. Trevor Lawrence started to show some signs down the stretch last year, but the jury's still out on him as far as I'm concerned. Either way, he is a huge improvement over the bust quarterback that Jacksonville tends to pick high in the draft, like Blake Bortles and Blaine Gabbert, to name a couple. Kansas City Chiefs picking wrong complementary pieces. Tough to go wrong when you have one of the best teams in the league, but Kansas City routinely seems to do so. In all fairness, they usually pick at the end of the round, but it would be great if they could actually hit on those picks to fill in the very little needs that they have here and there, rather than just swinging and missing on big names like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Las Vegas Raiders picking low-character players. The Raiders have a long tradition of risking it for the biscuit on players coming out of college with legitimate character concerns. And unsurprisingly, we have seen the chickens come home to roost more than a couple of times over the years. Los Angeles Chargers wasting picks on running backs. The Chargers are like the person who keeps trying to recreate their ex in a new relationship. They had a public split with Melvin Gordon in 2019, and ever since, they've tried to find his clone in the draft. After taking just one running back in between 2016 and 2019, they took 4 in 3 years, and poetically, Austin Eckler has turned into their guy. And he was undrafted entirely. Los Angeles Rams legit never having picks. There's really not much to say on this one. The Rams simply never have picks, which would be a mistake had they not cashed in on actually winning a Super Bowl. Miami Dolphins whiffing on offensive linemen. I don't know if it's the Miami Heat or the nightlife or the developmental system or perhaps the lack thereof, but the O-linemen that the Dolphins take never seem to pan out. Liam Eichenberg and Austin Jackson, who they took in the second and first rounds respectively in 2021 and 2020, have been underwhelming at best. Minnesota Vikings not investing high enough picks in defensive end. It shouldn't be surprising that the franchise that infamously missed a draft selection entirely by letting the clock expire still has some drafting woes to this day. The Vikes haven't taken a defensive end higher than the 4th round since 2015, and even then it was in the 3rd. Maybe they keep expecting to find a diamond in the rough because they lucked out with Danielle Hunter that year. New England Patriots, terrible at picking wide receivers. New England has been the gold standard in the NFL for over 20 years. But if there's been any chink in the armor, besides letting Tom Brady go for those last couple of years, it has been their inability to draft wide receivers. And this has gotten increasingly worse with time. New Orleans Saints not looking for a franchise quarterback. New Orleans got lucky that Drew Brees fell into their lap and proceeded to have a career renaissance. Now, the Saints brass seem to have fallen victim to the gambler's fallacy as they continue to ignore the most important position in the game during the draft process, instead opting to shuffle through retreads like Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, and now Derek Carr. New York Giants can't nail a high draft pick. The Giants don't always have a super high draft pick, but when they do, they always seem to botch it. Last year, they took defensive end Kayvon Thibodeau 5th overall out of Oregon, and he amassed just 4 sacks in 14 games. And 7th overall pick, offensive lineman Evan Neal, was even worse. Andrew Thomas has just been meh, and let's face it, Daniel Jones just became legitimately playable. We'll see if he can even deliver the return on investment you'd want from a 6th overall pick. New York Jets going big on a quarterback. If looking at the Zach Wilson experiment isn't evidence enough, think back to names of yesteryear like Mark Sanchez or even Christian Hackenberg. Or Bryce Petty to a lesser extent. The Jets either take a QB way too high or go after the big name coming out of college, and it just never works out. Philadelphia Eagles drafting bust wide receivers. Deshaun Jackson is just about the only wide receiver that Philly's taken high in the draft that hasn't been a flat-out bust. Devontae Smith may too be bucking the trend, but it'll take more than one decent pick to overwrite years of history, especially with the likes of Jalen Reagor, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and Nelson Aguilar having eaten up valuable draft capital in Philly. Pittsburgh Steelers, no love for the trenches. The Steelers have a troubling trend of ignoring the trenches at the top of the draft. It's been over 10 years since they took a lineman in the first round, and that was six-time Pro Bowler David DeCastro, which begs the question, why do they neglect this integral part of their roster? The San Francisco 49ers drafting running backs that they don't need. Much has been made about how any running back can play in Kyle Shanahan's system, which makes it all the more confusing that they continue to cast such a wide net on the position in the draft when they really don't need to. Seattle Seahawks, pretending that they don't need an O-line. For years, Seattle all but fully abandoned the offensive line during their draft process, instead allowing Tom Cable to try and piece together a line throughout the year with castaways and positional converts. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, low-ceiling quarterback prospects. Let's take a trip down memory lane. Kyle Trask, Jameis Winston, Mike Glennon. None of these guys, even Jameis, really screamed Hall of Fame potential. And Tennessee Titans wasting all of their high picks. The Titans, well, they just seem to outright waste their top draft picks year in and year out. Treylon Burks was rough last year, but perhaps the most embarrassing example would be Isaiah Wilson, who after being drafted in 2020 played just one game in the pros. Washington Commanders, choosing the wrong quarterbacks. The Washington Commanders always seem to choose the wrong quarterbacks. RG3 was a flash in the pan, Kirk Cousins was an insurance policy brought to life, and I don't want to speak lightly about the Dwayne Haskins tragedy, but he only lasted 2 seasons with the team after being taken 15th overall in 2019. But what would you like to see your favorite team do in this year's draft? Let us know in the comment section below. If you liked this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.